welcome to another episode of the Unscripted Pharmacist.
I think it's episode 9.
Something
already.
like that. I can't even remember. I'm joined once again with Chris Stevenson. Today we're going to talk about something that I think comes up a lot in normal everyday conversations.
Absolutely.
And that is fat. As much as we hate it on ourselves, and many people hate it in their diet.
Okay. Perhaps we can set it up maybe from the beginning. We are aficionados of something called the low-carb diet. What we found is that we've been eating wrong our whole lives, and that before the Industrial Revolution, perhaps, we ate a much different diet, and that's the way, humans evolved over millions of years, was in a completely different diet than what we have now. Mm-hmm. We find that we really don't need those carbs. They're actually very harmful. Okay, and so people are going to various low-carb, high-fat diets, but then the question is, aren't fats bad?
Yeah.
Okay, and that Kyle, who's the unscripted pharmacist, is going to be a professor in this lecture today. It's going to be a good one.
That's going to be tough.
Gonna be a good one.
Those are some big shoes to fill.
All right.
I would have to say that I usually talk about diabetes, right? I usually talk about blood sugars, but the other flip side to that coin is, why do diabetics die from cardiovascular disease? And that ends up on the death certificate, and not diabetes, which is several lines lower, right? It's a complication typically of diabetes, or really just poor diet. So why are they at increased risk for coronary artery disease, strokes, and the list goes on and on and on. And we can tell from a lot of new data, a lot of new ideas about what's the mechanism, how does this happen? What in the world do carbohydrates and insulin have anything to do with, say, circulating fats in the form of lipids? Okay, so which was what we're going to get into today. So really, this talk it really should be, it's in defense of fat. I eat a lot of fat. I enjoy a lot of fat. My diet's significantly higher than most in fat. Probably the amount of fat that we should eat is probably in the 60 to 70% of our total, say, calories for the day.
This is not what we've been taught our whole lives.
No.
That's
not how I grew up either.
All the dietitians, all the experts, would tell you to limit the amount of fats that you eat.
Yeah.
But we're finding, the evidence is showing that there are plenty of studies out there that say that yes.
Well, you bring up a really good point. You talk about experts. Like, we rely on these experts, and that's kind of why you should be watching this show, because it's all about, hey, don't trust anybody. Get informed. Be a skeptic. Research everything, because it's there. And now the amount of data that we have is no different than the data that a physician would have going to med school. We have access to everything, and we should have our own really critical evaluation of the data. And actually, I'm going to quote Dr. Ali here, because I got a lot of my information from him, and I just saw him last weekend at the Low Carb Denver conference. Such a nice, humble man. I really enjoyed talking with him, but I asked if I could use his slides, and he's great with it. And he also says something that I think is difficult, because we talk about statins. This is really hard for him to swallow and say, hey, maybe as a physician I'm in the way. Maybe I'm the #1 cause of death in the United States. Because he's prescribing things, right? But prescribing these statins, which we'll get into another lesson.
Statins are drugs that are meant to lower cholesterol.
Well, lower cholesterol that, unfortunately, most, if not all, diabetics are on. So that's troublesome for me. And when you think, well, you're a pharmacist, of course you should be supporting this. I'm not. I'm not in support of statins, and neither is Dr. Ali. And we'll get into why. Okay. Because believe it or not, we have to have fat. We have to have cholesterol. Right, so essentially, this is basically a talk or a discussion about fats and how healthy they actually are. It sounds really strange to put that in the same sentence, on kind of an oxymoron. Healthy fats, really?
It does.
And when people think of healthy fats, they typically think of, it's olive oil. Man, no, I'm not a big supporter of olive oil at all. I'm not really supportive of any plant oil. So,
okay, but you're starting us off with cholesterol.
Right.
This is what our doctors are telling us to avoid.
Right.
Okay, but there are good benefits of having a certain amount of cholesterol in your bloodstream.
Right, because without them, you're dead.
All right.
Okay, we even have, there's some people that are actually born without the ability to actually have any cholesterol, and man, they don't live very long.
Oh.
They might live to be 30 or 40 years old, but they don't live very long.
Yeah.
But if you look at the human body and what we're composed of, we're really composed of essentially just muscle, right? Majority of our body is muscle tissue, which is made out of protein, out of essential amino acids, as well as fat. Fats are essential. This is your energy source. And believe it or not, carbs are not essential. There's no essential carbohydrate. And unfortunately, they're really just for energy. Carbs are strictly for energy. And this, like I've said before, this is a horrible tank. This tank can only...
Your tank of energy.
Carb energy. Let's
Yeah.
talk about stored glycogen, stored glucose, stored carbohydrates. This stuff's done in 8 to 12 hours. You don't have a lot of the ability to store a heck of a lot of calories in the form of carbs, but you have tons of energy in the form of fat. So if you look at fat and protein, they're responsible for energy, structure, as well as function. Carbs don't provide that for us at all. There is no essential carbohydrates. Matter of fact, you'll make your own. So don't worry about the carbohydrates in your life.
You
okay?
don't need to.
You don't need them. Get
carbohydrates.
rid of them.
Okay.
They're not your friend. So many people, like myself, have lived and flourished and thrived very well without them. Surprisingly. And it's not like your blood sugar is going to get so low that you're going to just be zapped with energy and you got nothing left in you. They are, as we talk about fats and we talk about proteins, they are vital for a cell. To make a cell, you must have these essential amino acids and these essential fats. So, but we're going to focus not about protein today. We're really going to focus on cholesterol and lipids, fats. Okay, cholesterol and a lipid are very different. Cholesterol is a waxy substance, and it's like 27 carbons long, and it doesn't mix in water. Like oil and water don't mix. You put olive oil in water, and you got to shake it up like crazy, and it may disperse for a few minutes, and then it's gone, right? And then it separates again.
Hydrophobic is what we call that.
Right, hydrophobic, yes. So how do we make it so that we can move this thing around? So we have these very important molecules that help move cholesterol around. But I guess first we should probably talk about what is cholesterol and what does it do.
Right.
All right, let's talk about cholesterol. So cholesterol is vitally important for immune function. It helps recognize a foreign invader, right? And it works with the white blood cells, the macrophage, to help remove the invader, but also it can sense it. And there's some interesting data with rats they injected them with some bacteria, and they give off a protein that helps that bacteria recognize whether or not it can grow. LDL is a part of that. That lipoprotein is part of that, to help recognize it. Cholesterol is also vitally important to make vitamin D, immune function. A big part of what we've been talking about with COVID, right? We got to have vitamin D in order for your immune function. You need it for bone, right? It has to be activated by light unless you're absorbing D3. So cholesterol is also important to make estradiol, estrogens, and testosterone. We wouldn't look like men if we didn't have cholesterol.
No, these are the hormones that make us men and women.
Yeah,
Estrogen,
right. That's why women are beautiful, because they got estrogen, right?
Yeah.
They wouldn't look like that if you didn't have cholesterol as a precursor. So the question is, why would you limit the amount of cholesterol? It's natural, it's normal, right?
Is it possible to have then too much cholesterol? Or does just liver take care of that?
The liver will take care of that, absolutely. But let's first talk about a little bit more about what exactly is cholesterol necessary for. It's also, you need it also to make the myelin sheath of a neuron. So
it's a structural componment, like the myelin sheath in the cell membrane and other structures of the body are made out of this waxy
substance,
kind of building block.
You couldn't make a brain without this fat and cholesterol.
Okay.
the fat and cholesterol in a diet, you'll end up with a retarded child. Okay. It's also, the LDL cholesterol also helps deliver all your fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. Those are very, very important.
I know. You certainly have to have these. Like, for example, vitamin K is used in
Part of
blood
the clotting factors, yeah.
Yes, if someone has a blood clotting
Abnormality,
problem,
right.
we give them vitamin K. But your
Yep.
body needs vitamin K, and you need cholesterol.
This
to make
is not
vitamin
in
K.
carbohydrates. You don't get this from carbohydrates. You get this from fat, right? Fat in your diet, and this is how it is moved around in the body. This lipoprotein moves these fat-soluble vitamins throughout the body. Also, if you think about what cholesterol does also in a cell membrane, like we saw earlier, it helps make the cell rigid enough so that it doesn't get completely smashed, right? But also makes it flexible enough to exist in basically like a watery atmosphere. So it's vital to be able to change its shape, and cholesterol allows that fluidity to be able to, for it to be able to withstand compression as well as expand when it needs to. And it also helps receptors stand erect. That receptor must be straight up in the air in order for something to happen at that receptor. It's not going to do any good if that receptor is laying down.
Okay, when you speak of receptors, you're talking about like
all receptors, all cells.
on the cell membrane.
Yeah.
There are receptors for hormones or for various molecules that perform
Right.
various functions of the cell. Okay.
And this isn't just humans. This is all animal cells. They all have cholesterol. They all have fat. Every single one of them. So imagine for a minute, if you damage a cell, you've got to replace it. What are you going to replace it with? You got to have the essential amino acids.
Yep.
You got to have the essential fats.
Yep.
Right? They have to be there. You have to have that cholesterol as well. That must be there to be able to repair. So obviously, if you want to make new cells, you better have some of this in your diet.
So cholesterol is not the boogeyman we've been told.
No, it's not. It's not. So, but it helps. It helps to understand really the boogeyman of LDL being lousy, right?
Yeah.
Stop the nomenclature. Stop the nonsense.
Okay, we
Stop
always-
calling it lousy LDL.
Well, yeah, and we call LDL least desirable lipoprotein, or
Okay,
we call
that's
it
good.
bad cholesterol.
Lousy, yeah,
And
yeah. Lucifer.
You're telling me this is not right.
No. LDL has gotten a really bad name
You
because
need
of some crappy science.
You need LDL for immune function.
Yeah, amongst many other things, right? But if you think about an LDL, it's produced in the liver, and basically it starts off large, and once it delivers, this is really important concept.
Okay.
That LDL must be the way that this can move through the blood, right? In this packaged molecule, essentially, and it has a protein that allows it to move around in water. Won't separate this way. It allows it to deliver, that LDL deliver its precious cargo. And I really mean that's precious cargo. That's the triglyceride
Right.
and the cholesterol,
Okay.
as well as all the other things we talk about, all the fat-soluble vitamins.
So I've heard you talk about LDL as the boat that carries triglycerides.
Yes, it's a boat,
and
absolutely.
cholesterol through the body.
Yep.
To the
Submarine,
target
boat,
organ.
whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Boat. I like boat.
Okay, you like boat. All right.
Boat.
But so,
So wait, LDL is a boat, and it carries cholesterol. So all right, help me out here. When we measure LDL,
right.
are we measuring the amount of cholesterol that is carrying, or are we measuring the number of LDL molecules?
we don't typically in a lipid panel that we get, like
Yeah.
the cheap lipid panel,
The
only
ubiquitous
thing
lipid panel. Right?
Yeah, you're going to get LDL-C, which is the LDL concentration. You're going to get the cholesterol concentration, you're going to get the triglyceride concentration, and you're going to get the HDL concentration. Okay?
Right.
So all those things are important, but we don't really know about the bad guy, which we talked about, like the VLDL is what comes out of the liver. And then
Right.
it
VLDL
gets
is very low.
very low density lipoprotein.
Right.
These are like giant beach balls. Okay? And then after it delivers its precious cargo, it gets a little bit smaller, and a little bit smaller, and a little bit smaller, right?
Yeah.
Normally, it only goes to a certain size, a bigger, fluffy LDL, which then it gets recycled and reuptake by the liver, and the liver can decide what it wants to do with it.
Okay, normally you say this is
Normally,
like before
yes.
we changed to the standard American diet.
Right, and then we
where
see
we're
this
eating a lot of
strange looking thing, which is a small, dense, very, very tiny LDL molecule. That really, its birth is a normal LDL particle that now gets oxidized and damaged. Okay, so this is the real bad guy. It's small, it's glycated because of blood sugar being too high and too elevated, as well as this LDL molecule, the very small one, sticks around a lot longer. So it has more time to interact with glucose. It also has more time to be oxidized. This is that LDL, when it gets oxidized, it's the small bad guy.
Okay.
And it's wicked.
So you're
That's
telling
the
me
bad guy. So you can say LDL's a bad guy, yes.
All right, let's recap just a little bit. Sorry, so I understand it.
Okay.
Because I'm not into the biochemistry as the degree that you are, Barry. So when you get a lipid panel, you will see that it will tell you an LDL figure.
Yeah.
But within the LDL, there are a couple of subsets.
Right.
Like we call
which we
it
don't
pattern A
know,
and pattern
right?
B.
Right.
One is the large.
You can actually get all of these.
Yeah.
You can get the VLDL and all that. You can get a lot of
We
these.
don't normally get it when you go to your
No, you
primary care
don't.
physician and you get your lipid panel. It's just going to give you a list of LDL. LDL. So there's the big and fluffy LDLs, and then there's small dense LDLs. You're saying that there are two that we don't really normally look at the measurements of.
Right. There's actually a whole bunch of those little dudes. But yeah.
And the little dudes are bad.
The little dudes are bad and we don't measure it because we're measuring LDL-C, which is concentration. We need to be measuring LDL-P, which stands for particle number. Okay, so the LDL-P would be very helpful. There's another way, and this may confuse things a little bit, but we can actually indirectly and directly measure the LDL number of particles by basically measuring the protein that really is attached to the LDL. So there's a little protein tail, and if you look at this slide, you can kind of see off to the right-hand side below the boat, you have this little colorful little, that is a protein that allows it to interact with other cells and do what so it can be recognized. And we can measure how many of those, because every LDL only has one of those, what we call ApoB. And we can count how many ApoBs you have and go, that's your particle number. Now we know if you got big fluffy or a whole bunch of little small dense LDL, right? Once again, you have a normal LDL, and when it gets oxidized and glycated, now it's a different beast. Now it's difficult to get rid of this thing.
Okay, so it's possible to measure it, but we don't normally measure it in the American healthcare system or even the worldwide healthcare system.
Right.
Do you think we're going to get to that point?
We probably will, but there is kind of a poor man's way of measuring this. Yeah, which we will talk about a little bit later.
Right.
Well, actually, we'll talk about it now.
All right, let's do it now. Okay.
Okay. So we have these different ways of measuring, kind of indirectly. This basically is a measure of your insulin resistance. We look at the other markers on that lipid panel, which is triglycerides and HDL.
Yes.
Okay. When your triglyceride to HDL ratio is above 1.5, we say you've got pattern B. Okay? So if you look at these small, see here's the tiny little particles, see the small LDL, we call this pattern B. This is when we take our triglycerides and we divide it by the HDL, and if it's more than 1.5, then we can say the majority of your LDL is small and dense. Okay? Again, it's a poor man's way of measuring. It would be better to measure and get a little bit more sophisticated. Yes, I think it'll become mainstream once we get the ability and the understanding by everyone in the healthcare field to understand and interpret the data.
Even healthcare workers, physicians, researchers, scientists need to come on board with the data, the evidence that's out there, to be educated that there are new and improved ways of measuring one's lipid panels, which is what we're talking about today. It's a whole new world that we are on the brink of, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think about it, it's probably been, honestly, if you don't know about triglyceride to HDL ratio, you probably haven't put your nose in anything medical literature-wise, study-wise, in the last 10 years. We've known this for a while now.
Then why is it not like widely adopted?
That's a heck of a good question,
Yeah.
because maybe we have a drug that destroys LDL and wipes it off the face of the planet. As many people would agree with the idea of destroying it. How could something that's so necessary, right? How in the world does it all of a sudden no longer have some sort of evolutionary importance and necessity for life? And now you want to say it's the LDL particle. Well, I guess it kind of is the LDL, since if we're more specific, we say it's the small, dense LDL that's oxidized and glycated, it's damaged, and unfortunately, it's really hard to get rid of. It has to be removed either by macrophages, which is white blood cells, or by the kidneys. That's difficult.
But
it's like sand.
The other LDL particle,
Which one?
is eliminated. Or the big and fluffy is
Big fluffy. Beach
is
balls.
eliminated by the liver. Why aren't the small dense? It just is it.
It has
there
to
are so
do
many?
with the reuptake by the liver. It doesn't recognize it. And you think about it, this thing is not normal. This is something we've kind of
Right.
like created.
This
is our problem. Because if you think about really where man should be and what should be killing us, it should be infectious disease and accidents. This is a new beast. This is the number one killer. This is what people are dying from, and this is really why. It's the bad guy. It is LDL, but it's a small, dense LDL, but it comes from a different process than
So when we're looking at our lipid panel
Yeah.
and we see that LDL, we still don't know, under normal circumstances now and then in the healthcare system today, what our small, dense, the particles of LDL are.
We don't.
And
Instead, we're killing the big fluffy
killing
ones.
people?
This is what's killing
This is
people.
what's killing people.
And that you're talking about statins.
All right, let's go into it.
break the ice here.
Okay.
So we're talking about the big fluffy LDLs that statins are able to destroy through its manufacturing process, right?
Okay, sorry. So
Yeah.
if I have high cholesterol, high LDLs especially, my primary care physician is going to recommend that I go on a statin like Lipitor or something.
Without looking at the number of particles you have and without evaluating your triglyceride to HDL ratio. And just so people out there understand this, go get your lipid panel. Go look at it. Look at your triglyceride to HDL ratio. Take the top one and divide it by the bottom one. Okay? If that's greater than 1.5, you're getting into trouble. Okay? Optimal, because there's shades between good and horrible, right?
Right.
If we're going to talk about what's optimal, the ratio is 1, like 70/70. That's ideal, right? When you start getting higher and higher amounts of triglyceride to HDL ratio, when that thing gets to 2, 3, 4, which we'll talk about later, which shows that you're really going to increase your risk of death.
Yeah.
That's the
right.
scary stuff.
So you started talking about statins.
Yeah.
Why are statins dangerous?
Statins, you're destroying through the manufacturing process in the liver of destroying cholesterol, which we talked about earlier. It's so vitally important. And it works through a certain enzyme, okay? And that enzyme is vitally important to make cholesterol, but it's also really vitally important to make ketones. So that's something else I'm going to throw in there, right?
Okay.
What you also find in these patients, and this is kind of going to a very deep cellular level, but it decreases the production of an enzyme called coenzyme Q10. Many people who are on statins have probably been told by their pharmacist or doctor, hey, you may want to pick up some of that coenzyme Q10, right? Coenzyme Q10 is like the spark plug for a cell. In order for the cell to even make ATP, energy currency, it must have coenzyme Q10. Now you're destroying the coenzyme Q10. It's not being made. Your spark plugs are decreasing. We all know that when you have crappy spark plugs, I guess this is back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Remember, like, when we use spark plugs,
Cars still
they
have spark plugs.
I mean, all my engines do. I don't know. Like, okay,
Yeah.
so you do have to have a spark for some sort of ignition, right?
do.
In order to create energy.
Yes.
Imagine now that you don't have that ATP production in all your cells, in your muscle cells, brain cells, right? All these very, very vitally important energy. So to create a thought, you must create ATP in order for things to work in the brain, for these channels to open and close really rapidly and to be able to have a thought, essentially.
Right.
You need ATP. And we're reducing the coenzyme Q10, the spark plug, to create the energy in the first place.
Okay.
It's a great drug if you want to look at labs, go poof, wow, that really dropped their LDL. They'll be at like 120 and drop them all the way down to 60, and you go, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. So you're saying, all right, so cholesterol's not the boogeyman. We don't need to reduce it with statins. And if we do use statins, then you're eliminating coenzyme Q10, which is needed for cellular function.
Absolutely.
All right.
But I would love to spend some time with all of you talking about statins as a pharmacist from my perspective, as well as cardiologists who I'm taking information from and going, hey, this stuff really needs to be looked at. This is not helpful. And matter of fact, I met an amazing man named Dr. David Diamond along with Dr. Nadir Ali, but basically he's exposing the trickery of the big pharma, the pharmaceutical industry, and how they've kind of conned us into thinking that it's super helpful. And I would love to spend some time talking about how they've kind of rigged the data, okay? It's not necessary for primary prevention, which is what most people are taking this for. That means you haven't had a heart attack. Secondary prevention, maybe, but it's certainly not through this LDL particle. So there's a recent study that I found out that David Feldman just kind of announced. He didn't announce the results, but we kind of get this idea. So what he did is he took a bunch of people who were ketogenic, and they've been ketogenic for a long time, and they had really high LDLs when they went on a low-carb diet, which you're like, okay, well, that's weird.
Okay.
Their LDL went really, really high.
All right, so these are people, normal people, went on keto, okay?
Yes.
And their other lipid panel numbers, maybe
Their triglyceride to HDL ratio was perfect.
they're good, but
Spot
their
on.
LDL number went through the roof.
Through the roof.
And that will freak out any physician.
Absolutely.
Okay? All
right? So why didn't they die?
Well, why didn't they die?
Right?
You would
Well,
think.
and here's the thing. Why is it that 75% of people who have heart attacks, and this number is probably debatable, but why do people who have heart attacks have normal LDL? If LDL is the boogeyman,
Yeah,
right? So obviously we're missing something here.
yeah.
We're missing the small, dense LDL that is like sand that goes everywhere.
Yeah. We're missing the consideration of the small dense LDL and its role in cardiovascular health.
Right.
Okay, sorry. David Feldman, finish that story.
Oh, Dave Feldman and lean mass hyperresponders. So what he did is...
Oh, wait. Lean mass hyperresponders.
Yeah.
You're getting technical.
Okay, I'll get technical.
Okay.
All right. So it's a certain type of person. I'm not one of them.
Okay. Lean mass means not obese.
Very lean, not obese. These are healthy people. Typically, they're kind of the athletic type.
Hyperresponder means
hyperresponder. So
their LDL went through the roof.
When you increase your fat, okay, their LDL shot way up. And we're talking like 300.
Sounds bad.
250, 300, they're super high. And then when they scan them to see if they had active disease in their coronaries,
like plaque inside your arteries.
They're looking for essentially calcified plaques.
Yeah, and you
so
can
they don't
do this.
have any.
You can do this in a CT machine in any clinic or hospital around the country. Okay.
Absolutely, and I would certainly recommend if you think that you might be at risk for an event. This is preventative medicine. This tells you whether or not you have old plaques. You can also do a CT angiogram, right? Along with this calcium score, the CAC, calcium, you can determine whether or not you have active plaques forming, as well as what plaques are already there.
All right,
Obviously, that would be a problem, right?
So common thought would be, okay, if your LDL score is through the roof, you're going to have lots of plaques, you're going to have calcified, your arteries are going to shrink down to nothing, okay? Especially your coronary arteries, which are the ones that feed the hearts, are going to they're completely 100% blockage. That's when you go in for your triple bypass heart attack surgery.
After the fact.
Okay.
After you've had your event.
This is what we would normally have expected.
Right. But this is preventative medicine. So so he goes in, we're going to scan all these people. So a calcium score of less than 100 is ideal. all of their calcium scores. Oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to release this. Oh, I guess I can.
Okay,
he said it at the conference, so I'm going to go ahead and do it.
This is what you heard.
Yes, they all had a calcium score of 0. So the lean mass hyperresponder, when they bumped up their fat intake significantly, they were doing the ketogenic diet, their LDLs went through the roof, and LDL was really the boogeyman, then they should all have lots of diseased vessels, and there was none.
All right, roll back here a minute again. You said 0.
Yeah, the calcium score was 0. They have no active disease. I know, it's crazy. But they don't have any active disease.
This is better than anyone else.
Right,
out
but
there.
also you think about people with familial hyperlipidemia, which is it's a genetic condition where they really have high LDL. They have very high cholesterol.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they alive? Right?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. If cholesterol is really the boogeyman here.
Yeah.
So it's quite fascinating.
That's a pretty good story.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Right. So these are people, again, that are on the ketogenic diet.
Right, and they're eating high amounts of fat.
But low amounts of carbohydrates.
Very low.
Okay?
If any.
And their LDL, this isn't everybody. These are just specific people that are lean mass.
It's not a very big group of people. No,
okay.
It's a small group.
But it goes to serve the story.
Adds to the evidence, for sure.
Yeah, if your LDL is high, you're not necessarily going to croak.
It's not the boogeyman.
It's not the boogeyman.
Right. So what is the boogeyman? Well, you can actually take your LDL particles and spin them out in a centrifuge and see what type you got. Right. You can see which ones are the small, dense, and which ones are the big and fluffy. And I kind of use this analogy, and I've heard this many times before. The big beach balls, which are the normal fat ones, right? Mm-hmm. If you dropped them off a bridge, it would just float along the stream. But if you dropped one of these small, dense, almost like BB, or like a golf ball, and you drop that off of a bridge, it's going right through the water. Okay, it has the ability to go everywhere. Mm-hmm. So it's like sand. And if you've ever been to the beach, we used to camp a lot on the beach. We used to go to the sand dunes in Manresa and Santa Cruz.
Sand gets everywhere.
Sand gets everywhere, and it's days later you're pulling it out, and that's kind of like when we start talking about coronary artery disease, and we start talking about how did these LDL particles get there?
All right. Conventional wisdom, or what we think of, is that this cholesterol, or in the form, being transported by the boats of LDL, just get deposited on the inside of your arteries.
Right.
Okay? And we think of that as just kind of building up, like if, say, you had a sewer pipe that got coated with gunk and gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Right.
But that's not what really happens. It gets more complicated. It's more nuanced than that. And it's really interesting that the science is explaining and showing us, and we're beginning to, not beginning, we've understood this for a while. It's becoming more mainstream now, that there's a different way that this plaque forms inside the walls of an artery.
Right. And you go, okay, well, why is the LDL there? There's some sort of insult. There's an initial insult of some kind. And it really typically, if you look at this slide, in the bottom left corner, you see these hair-like structures. This is the glycocalyx. The glycocalyx is so important to protect the integrity of this coronary artery. This is a cross-section. This, on the bottom left corner, is normal coronary arteries with these hair-like structures. And imagine if that got damaged because of, say, oxidation, high blood pressure, right? Inflammation, all these things can damage this thing, which cause some sort of reaction. And like I said earlier, in order to repair this, you gotta have fat and protein at the scene in order to build new cells. And they're just there. And the question is, how did they get there? Right? And if you look to the far right of this slide, you can see what we call the vasa vasorum, where these blood vessels feed your coronary artery blood vessels.
The blood vessels are
cells.
The blood vessels are the red part in that cross section on the right hand side that we see.
Right. So
they're
every cell has to have a blood supply. It has to have nutrients, and the musculature of this coronary artery receives its nutrients from the vasa vasorum. And in those blood vessels is how the small, dense LDL gets there. So the question is, did it cause it? Every time I go to a fire, I see a fireman.
Yep.
Is he the cause of the fire? Did he cause the fire? No, he was just there at the scene of the crime, right? So to say, oh, well, is it really caused by the small dense LDL? It's there at the scene of the crime, but it's oxidized, it's damaged. And this is what's critical is of our understanding is that when it gets oxidized, and this small dense LDL gets oxidized, it's a foreign invader. And a foreign invader, you should automatically think white blood cells. White blood cells, their job is to remove.
That's right. In the same way that a macrophage, which is a white blood cell, will engulf and destroy a bacteria.
Right.
It will
it's going, right. The macrophage is there. We have plenty of white blood cells at the scene of the crime. I don't think the white blood cells is going to get blamed for this. But the sand, which is everywhere, and unfortunately, it also it tries to repair itself. This is all kind of an immune response. So it starts building from the inside. If we look at that graph again, or the cross section of a coronary artery, we see that it creates these really not very stable blood vessels. They're leaky blood vessels. They're kind of like if you think of varicose veins, they're superficial. They don't. They're there to try to repair, but they leak. So they're leaking the sand essentially, and then the white blood cells are going in there, these macrophages, and there's so much of this damaged, oxidized, small dense LDL that they become foam cells and die. So these foam cells die, and that kind of creates all kinds of problems and makes things unstable.
Okay.
So
is that the plaque? Is that all right, so there's a dumpster fire going on inside the walls of this.
I like the dumpster fire. That's a good one. I like that.
Leaky coronary artery. And then the white blood cells come in, they're engulfing.
Doing what it's supposed to do.
These little BBs that you talked about, the small dense LDLs.
Right.
Okay, and then they're dying and becoming foam cells and dying and collecting.
Yeah.
Forming
accumulating.
The plaque.
Right.
Forming the plaque.
Forming the plaque and squeezing out the space where blood needs to flow. We also haven't even talked about what else is at the scene of the crime. It's not just the cholesterol, the small dense LDL, and the macrophages, which become foam cells. There's a couple other pieces to the puzzle that we should probably talk about, which is clotting. We got blood clots.
Yes.
Okay, so we talked about the triglyceride and HDL. This is really, a lot of this information comes from an amazing person, Paul Mason, from Sydney, Australia. He, in a beautiful talk, and I should add the links to it to the description, but he talks about how blood clotting and how basically metabolic syndrome and how it affects the ability to clot. When you damage that glycocalyx is protective. Okay, it has a way of decreasing the amount of clots that form around this arterial this lumen. So it keeps the blood clots from forming. So imagine now it's damaged or it gets oxidized and doesn't have the ability to stop a clot from forming. So clots form. Again, part of the repair process. This is why blood pressure is such a vital point, right? You cause some sort of injury.
Yes.
You have this immune process, and unfortunately you have all the players, which is a blood clot, you have this cholesterol, small dense LDL, and then there's another thing that we haven't talked about, and that is plant sterols. Plant sterols are kind of interesting. This is from seed oils.
Okay.
And we know seed oils have gone through the roof.
I think perhaps you need to define plant sterols. It seems to have the same suffix as cholesterol.
Sterols and
cholesterol.
It's fake cholesterol. Let's call it what it is. I'm calling it phony. Okay? And this has been our focus for the last 100 years. Well, let's get rid of the cholesterol and saturated fat in the diet, and let's replace it with these fake cholesterol, sterols, plant sterols.
We're eating plants to get plant sterols.
Yeah, we don't want them actually, and they're at the scene
oils.
of the crime as well.
Do we get these plant sterols from plants or from seed oils?
Seed oils are the biggest culprit, but it's in everything. I mean, it's probably the biggest. Yes, we don't absorb that much of it, but probably the number one culprit is cereals, grains, right?
What, like cornflakes?
Cornflakes, your so-called healthy oatmeal and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's loaded with plant sterols, which is fake cholesterol. So it's kind of moved around, and it is in that LDL particle as well. It is at the scene of the crime because LDL delivered it there.
Okay, now wait. Are plant sterols beneficial or harmful?
Oh, that's a great question. So with the last 100 years, what's gone through the roof, right?
Yeah, obesity.
Heart disease.
Heart disease.
Heart disease
Yeah.
is huge. So what we did is we thought it was all about calories. And fat is just loaded with calories.
It's true.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just dense.
Yes.
That's all it is. It's super, super dense because there's no water in it, because water and oil don't mix. But carbon for carbon, if I would compare, carbohydrates, and you go, there's less calories in carbohydrates. Well, carbohydrates there's a lot of water in there. You're not accounting for all the water, right?
Yeah.
But if carbon for carbon, because these are all chains of carbon here, right? If we stretch them all out, one's got water in it, one doesn't. So density-wise, the amount of space that fat fills up for the same 1,000 calories, the carbohydrates is going to be a much bigger mass compared to the fat. So you're like, all right, calorie-wise, fats are bad because there's way too many calories in there. So we got to reduce our caloric intake.
This is what we've always been told.
So let's replace the fat with carbohydrates. In this case, we're taking the fat out of the diet, especially saturated fat, and we're replacing it because saturated fat increases cholesterol.
Right.
So we're going to take that, which is stupid because we can't really absorb that much cholesterol anyways. It doesn't come from your diet. Your body's making 85% of it. And if you take in more, you just crap it out anyways. So you're taking these seed oils because there's less calories and less saturated fat in it. But this is not normal. Seed oils are not normal. They go rancid. They're easily oxidized. And then once again, how do you damage the glycocalyx? Well, you deliver some reactive oxygen species, ROS, right? And that ROS is a very dangerous molecule that has to be engulfed with an antioxidant. Okay? And think of how helpful antioxidants are. We talked about vitamin E as an antioxidant. What about the use of NAC, N-acetylcholine, for the prevention of cardiovascular disease, coronary artery disease? That's a wicked antioxidant and helps with removing this reactive oxygen species. This thing's potent. It's like an electron that's zipping around doing all kinds of damage. Okay, so when you reduce the amount of, well, let's go back to seed oils. Sorry, seed oils, which we have now is such a big part of the standard American diet. So we're talking about vegetable oils,
sunflower seed oil,
sunflowers, canola oil, soybean. That's one of the top 5 subsidized crops in the U.S.
Yes.
Corn oil. This stuff is really, really bad.
Corn is a seed, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a grain. Okay, it's garbage, right?
All right.
I don't eat any corn. Stay away from seed oils, and this is why we have seen a massive increase in heart disease since 1900s when we've increased the amount of seed oil. We didn't test it on people first. American Heart Association, they were glad to take all the money from Procter & Gamble for the whole Crisco thing, right?
Yeah.
And here they are. They haven't tested on human beings, but we're using cottonseed oil and giving it to humans, going, hey, this stuff's probably okay.
The term they use is generally considered safe.
Right.
Yeah.
Grass. It
But-
should never have gotten grass. But this is our substitute for the real cholesterol that we get from animal fats.
Which we'd been eating for millions of years
Yeah.
before the last couple hundred years, maybe.
Yeah. So why are we seeing this huge, huge bump? It's crazy.
Right.
And it's all related to our diet.
Plant sterols from seed oils are damaging the interior of your coronary artery. So did I just boil it down
Yes.
to one sentence?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It probably is the biggest cause. And so here, there's a really cool experiment that was done in Minnesota from 68 to 73. It was like 7,000 people, right? And this is a long time frame, right?
Yeah.
This is a randomized control trial.
All right,
this is your NIH dollars, right?
Yeah.
This is your grant money. This is millions of dollars to do this.
These are the ones
very
we
important
trust the
experiment,
most. Okay.
right? Because this one here was going to prove it all. If you throw enough money at something, eventually your hypothesis, will be true. That's what we kept thinking, because you had someone by the name of Ansel Keys saying, hey, it's the cholesterol and the saturated fat in the diet that's killing us. Well, so here's a cool study. So they wanted to test whether replacement of saturated fat with vegetable oil reduces coronary heart disease and death by lowering serum cholesterol. So we took the saturated fat out, we added vegetable oil. Okay? So if cholesterol was the boogeyman, this should have shown a huge improvement. But what did it really prove? The intervention group had significant reduction in serum cholesterol compared with controls. So, of course, if you don't eat the cholesterol and saturated fat from animal products, your cholesterol will go down.
Yes.
Your fake cholesterol is going to go up.
Okay.
So what's the cost of that? There was a 22% higher risk of death for every 30 milligram per deciliter lowering of that cholesterol. You put the fake cholesterol in, and you took the real cholesterol out, and it killed you.
Mortality went up when cholesterol went down?
Yeah.
This is not what we would expect.
No, it's not. Matter of fact, it's kind of an interesting relationship. That there's a lot of big longitudinal studies. They follow people over many, many years and show that those that had higher cholesterol is actually more protective against a lot of things, including Alzheimer's and cancer, right? Not just coronary artery disease. Like, these people can think, right? These people aren't on statins lowering their cholesterol. They can actually function and work. And I'm telling you, with the statins, they have downplayed the side effect. And yes, they did it legally, but it certainly wasn't ethical. And that's the grassroots movement that I'm really a part of. When I go to these conferences, it's like, hey, there's a big group of us going, no. The experts aren't experts. Experts have conflicts of interest, and we should not trust and rely on them. Trust and rely on what you have access to. And this study with the Minnesota coronary experiment, this study anyone can pull up. You can read this data for yourself, right? The principal investigator, when asked, why didn't you publish this? He didn't. This was 68 to 73. It was done in 73. It wasn't published till 2016.
What? Wait.
Yeah. He said because it didn't show what he expected it. Again, if you throw a bunch of money at something, you're expecting your hypothesis to become true.
You have to publish it, whether you get the results.
Yeah, those aren't the rules. Those weren't the rules in 73.
Oh, that's true.
Rules have changed.
Yes.
Rules have changed. So you don't have to necessarily publish a negative result. That's exactly what's happening here. They're cherry picking the studies that they want. This was a huge disaster, not to mention a huge cost. We have dumped so much money, and we could go on and on. The NHANES, the Women's Health Initiative, all these very large studies to show, no, when you reduce the real cholesterol, the saturated fat, and the real cholesterol that we get from animal products, that actually, when you reduce it, it actually hurts people. It actually has worse outcomes.
And if we had known that in 73, when that should have been published.
Yeah, try not to think about how things could have changed.
There could have been a cascade where we totally changed the way we eat, starting at that point, and yet it didn't. So
this has been, unfortunately, why I do this. This is like this knowledge, this understanding comes with a level of responsibility. You need to warn. You have a duty to warn. And I really feel, as a pharmacist, I have a duty to warn my patients, but this is informed consent. If I give you this drug, it better work for you and not harm you.
Yes.
It needs to. The benefits must outweigh the risks, and that's not what's happening here. I can't wait to do the statin thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
All this it blows your mind.
Yeah.
To think about.
Yeah, because we look how have we gotten this far?
Yeah.
We the standard American diet, which is all about eating excessive amounts of carbohydrates, creating a significant problem with our cholesterol and lipid profile, right? But it's also it does this really essentially by bumping up insulin levels, which, remember, insulin is fat storage hormone, okay? People are really good at storing fat. They suck at burning it, right? So if you're really good at storing it and you can't burn it very well, you're tired.
Yes.
You're tired and you're overweight,
Yep.
and that is the problem. We can fix this problem. It's really simple, really, really simple. This isn't difficult, because when you feed the body properly, energy goes up, appetite goes down, because you're getting what you need. You now become really good at burning the one thing that you've got a lot of storage of, which is fat. Now you can burn your fat, because fat's your primary fuel source. And what I'm telling people, switch your primary fuel source from this tiny little carb tank to this massive fat tank. Make that your primary fuel. I promise you,
Okay.
it'll work. And you will feel amazing. You'll have more energy than you'll ever know.
If you switch to being a fat burner rather than a carbohydrate burner, there are like this
Huge
laundry list of benefits.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you do that? How long does it take? Is it difficult?
This is what we do, as you know.
Yeah.
We look at this. We teach patients. We teach them what their foods are doing. Scan your CGM, continuous glucose monitor, your Freestyle Libre that we use.
Right. That's what tells us our blood sugar.
We've used, right?
Yes.
We've experimented with this. It tells us what is the food really doing. That's important. If it's spiking my glucose, I'm going to make an inference and saying, that's definitely going to raise my insulin level. That's going to make me do what I've been doing this whole time, right?
Store fat.
Storing fat and not burn it.
Right.
If something's good at storing, it also should be very good at stopping you from burning it. Because that's kind of almost like the same function. If I want to store something, I'm not going to be pulling it out at the same time. That needs to stop. So every time you eat some food, 6 hours later, insulin levels go back to normal. Now you can start accessing and burning it. That fat storage hormone's gone, right? Or at least it's normal. And that's what the ketogenic diet is. You're getting insulin to as low as humanly possible and getting better at burning fat, and ketones is that physical evidence, and we measure that. So utilizing a continuous glucose monitor to see what your foods do to you, as well as measuring ketones. Now, so many people go, oh, I'm doing the ketogenic diet, I got keto food, that doesn't work for me. Hey, did you measure ketones? Did you get above 0.5? Were you really doing the ketogenic diet? Because if you're really doing the ketogenic, especially if you're overweight, those ketones will be there. They will be up. They will be definitely elevated. And this is where the fasting and intermittent fasting, which I would encourage everyone to really think about, because that's where the magic happens. Because now you become really energized because you're burning fat for energy and not storing it. And you've got that hunger hormone, leptin, is now really suppressed.
Okay, but all right, let's go back to intermittent fasting, which is where one does not eat for X amount of time, which could be anywhere from 16 hours, which is relatively easy to do.
So 16 hours fast, 8-hour meal time.
Or longer.
Feed.
Okay.
Right.
There are people out there that fast for much longer periods of time. Yeah. But the benefit of that is that it keeps you in ketosis, where you're producing ketones for fuel rather than using carbohydrates.
Right.
You're producing ketones, you're using your fat as a fuel source.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yes.
Right?
Great fuel source.
You lose weight, you get healthier, you get happier, your brain functions better.
Right. The amount of enzymes that you have to make that system run goes up. You become very efficient at burning fat. So if you're really efficient at burning fat, eat more fat. Don't be afraid of fat. Seriously, fat, it's your friend. It literally is your friend. But let's talk about, let's be super clear on that. Animal fat. Animal fat's your friend. Not the fake fat, which
Not
really is your
sterols.
plants. And unfortunately, I hate to do this to vegans and vegetarians, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. And this is my pet peeve, okay? You eat a bunch of plants, okay? And plants have fiber in it. Remember, I just said earlier, the amount of carbohydrates you need to sustain life is 0. It's not part of your body. It's not part of the function. And carbohydrates, in the form of soluble and insoluble fiber, create a barrier along the lumen of your GI tract that stops you from absorbing the nutrients. So whatever's in the plant that you really want to absorb, you're not absorbing because you've created this barrier. Yeah, it doesn't make your blood sugar spike very much, but at the same time, it keeps you from absorbing what you need. And this is where, as a carnivore, when you eat the right kind of foods and when you eat animal products, it slows the absorption and allows the body to absorb as much as possible. That's favorable. That's what we want.
All right, so now you've blown minds again.
Yes.
By saying
eating animal, right?
Being a vegetarian, being a vegan,
yes,
is not the healthiest way you can live either. All right, mind blown again. You're saying,
yeah. I'm basically
it's hard.
saying, right? I know.
It's hard to get past this, okay? Because we've always been told that vegetarianism is the healthiest way to go.
I know. And you can't hate the cow.
Wait.
Don't hate the cow. The cow is not the enemy here.
If you're on the ketogenic diet and you're eating plenty of animal proteins, okay, can you? Are you saying I should eliminate my broccoli?
Yeah, I really am.
And you say this because there's
the broccoli,
evidence?
but the broccoli that you get at the store is not the broccoli from thousands of years ago.
No, it certainly wouldn't.
It isn't.
No.
Okay, so it's very different. Not to mention, it's nutrient poor because we've been monocropping, and the density is, the amount of nutrients is horrible in comparison to, if you want to forage and grab stuff from the environment, go for it. I hope you don't get sick. Because
that would be
these
dangerous
animals
for me.
have their own defense mechanism with their own chemicals. So my belief is that really, don't hate the cow. Replace your saturated fat. Replace your saturated fat with steroids, and your cholesterol will go down. But at what expense? This is really important because you're trying to reduce the cholesterol in your body by eating these plant sterols, and I don't think that's favorable. So eat less of the standard American diet, right? Get rid of it. Get rid of your carbs that will lower your insulin. Replace your carbs with plants that will naturally have a lowered glycemic index. But is that really optimal? Because I'm telling you, optimal is an animal-based diet.
Okay.
I know I'm going out on a limb as an unscripted pharmacist, but it works every time.
Most people are going to go, there's no way I'm only eating meat.
That's
I can't be just strictly a carnivore. It can. Is there certain levels of risk here that you could base your diet upon? Like you're saying that your very best optimal diet would be
is still a carnivore diet.
Carnivore diet.
Yep.
But say for example, all right, I want to have my broccoli. You know, every now and then, you know, a salad.
It wants to leave you.
Is it okay?
You think about it. It's supposed to add the ability to be able to really freaking be able to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
Oh, you think, I need to have this plant matter in order to decrease the amount of constipation that I have, right? But are you adding cars to a traffic jam? Is it really that nutritious? Mm-hmm. So, anyways, this is a great discussion. I can't wait to continue on this because I want to talk about statins and a couple other things.
Yeah, there's so much more.
There's so much, and we got to talk about your triglyceride HDL because I think that would be fun as well.
Okay.
What are your risk factors for an event? Yes.
Right.
All right.
But I'm getting better.
You're getting better. So, I mean, I'm hoping that after this episode, people will go look at their lipid profiles, their lipid panels, and maybe look at them a little bit differently. Yeah, you may have a battle with your doctor and your cardiologist, but I think it would be get informed.
And do your own research.
Be a skeptic. Do your own research, and that's why you're listening and that's why you're watching. So, thank you. And hasta la vista, baby.
Okay.